Broadcasted live.
Hey, who wants to have some fun?
There are balls coming from all over the place. Left field, center field, right field. See, this is the kind of thing, quite honestly, right now, that makes you want to see the Chicago Cubs team lose.
Now, you just saying you want to have fun, or do you really want to have fun?
It'll be fun.
Will the next person that sees anybody throw anything onto this field, point them out, or get them out of here? You don't live in Cleveland. You live in Cincinnati.
You talking to me? You talking to me?
That is the farthest thing in the universe from the truth.
Hello, everyone, live. It's the Dan Scott Show. And right there is your host, Dan Scott.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Tuesday edition of the program. I am your host, Dan Scott, and we're very happy, as always, to have you joining us here on the show at Dan Scott or thedanscottshow.com and our other platforms across Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. Today's going to be a little bit different. Today, we are going to set sports aside for a moment, and we're going to spend the entire program in a remembrance of what happened 17 years ago today on September the 11th, 2001, a day that, there's no other way to say it, that just rocked every one of us to our core, showed us that we were not as secure as we thought we were. It brought us together more than we had been in a long, long time in the aftermath. And then as the years have gone by, we have seen that togetherness drift apart, probably further than we have ever been in a long, long time, maybe ever. But I thought that today would be appropriate to kind of step back from what we all enjoy, and at the same time, it's a little bit of madness from time to time, and try to gain a little perspective. And if nothing else, for the folks who watch this, if it will cause you to just kind of recall where we were in the days and weeks and months after what happened on September the 11th, 2001, and how this country put aside political differences and many, many other differences and came together for a common good, and that is trying to reach out and help our neighbor. Maybe in some small way in our little corner of the world, we can recapture that a little bit. I want to start with just, where I was and what I was doing at the time. It was a Tuesday morning, as you all know, and I was on my way to begin my daily talk show at the Clemson radio station, WCCP. And I had not listened to any news. I had not turned on the television or anything that morning. So when I got to the studio, I noticed unusually there were a lot of people gathered in the studio. And some of you may remember Big Mo. He was actually on the air that morning. And we had developed a pretty good relationship, Mo and I. He did some high school football with me, and so I would get there a little bit early sometimes and just kind of go in and sit and listen to him. He was a larger-than-life personality in more ways than one. I mean, Mo is a bigger guy than I am, if you can fathom that. But on this particular morning, as I walked in the door, I noticed that he and everybody else were stone quiet. And I guess I had not even turned the car radio on to listen to the station as I got in. So when I walked in to the studio that morning, I asked, hey, what's going on? And somebody mentioned that a plane had flown in to one of the towers in New York City. And, we thought at the time, like many, many people did, that, perhaps it was an accident, perhaps it was without having seen anything, at least I thought maybe it was a small plane that had kind of veered off course, or somebody had lost their equilibrium and lost their ability to control the plane, and that's where it ended up. But obviously, as we found out very, very shortly thereafter, that was not the case. It was an act of terrorism. It was a jetliner that plowed into the Twin Tower. And while we were listening to the news and watching what was transpiring on television at the same time, of course, the second plane hit. And then we knew 100% for sure, like everybody else did, that it was no accident. Both towers have been hit. I think it was 9:03 a.m. when the first tower came down, and we all watched in horror and stunned silence, and whatever you can conjure up as far as feelings in those days collectively in that room. That's what we were all feeling that day. And so watched it unfold live and listened to the news coverage live via, I think it was ABC News radio that we had access to via satellite at the time. And just, without words, really did not know what to say or what to do. We knew that there was not going to be any sports talk that day, that for the time being, and as it turned out for the rest of the week, WCCP was going to become a news talk station as people in Clemson and the entire upstate area used us as a way to kind of vent some of their feelings and try to process through what happened. But on that day, we didn't know any of that was going to go on. We were watching in just incredible confusion, like everybody else was, the events that were taking place in New York City and at the Pentagon and in the field, I believe, in Pennsylvania, where the other plane was taken down. And then, there were reports of other planes and other things that had happened, which turned out to be false. There were a lot of rumors and other things flying around at that time. And it became, obvious pretty quickly that it was a coordinated effort, that it was an attack on the United States by some terrorist group. We did not know who, did not know what, or did not know why, at least largely in the public at that time. We would soon find out, of course, it was organized by Osama bin Laden and carried out by some of his followers. And it rocked this nation to its very core. It rocked this area to its very core. So again, knowing there was not going to be any sports talk that day, I think we all just kind of dispersed and went home, and we left the radio playing instead of whatever national sports we had at the time. One-on-one sports maybe was the old one we had at that particular moment. We left, again, I think it was ABC News playing, and kept that on. And we all went home to be with our families and to kind of try and process as best we could what happened. And like everybody else, we sat and we watched television for the rest of the day, watched the news coverage, watched the story, the multiple stories as they developed, watched some of the horrible images that, would be caught on camera that I unwittingly relived this morning, and looking for some video footage of something that you're going to see later in the program, and seeing the terrible sight of people jumping from 3/4 up of the World Trade Center buildings with fire raging above them, or maybe even on the floor that they were on, and they had somehow kind of escaped the impact of the plane. But knowing that there was no way out for them, and choosing to die by leaping out of the building and plummeting to the ground below from that far up, as opposed to suffocating, burning up, whatever was going to happen. And of course, nobody knew in those moments prior to that in just a few moments, both towers were going to collapse. Both towers were going to come down. And so we watched all of that. And to say that it affected me, to say that it affected those around me, to say that it affected the entire country, obviously would be a vast understatement. So the next day, the decision was made. We were going to go back on the air, but we were not going to talk sports. We were going to allow people to call in and kind of express their feelings, express their pain, their confusion, their anger more than anything. And I wish I had thought about it, because somewhere at home I have on cassette tape, mind you, the show that we did that day. And I wish I had pulled it out. I wish I had thought about it before just now. Just now it kind of clicked in my head that somewhere is that cassette tape. May have not ever been able to find it, but it's in the house, in the garage somewhere. But I just remember the combination of anger and hurt and confusion and patriotism all kind of rolled into one that came from the people that we talked to. And we all process things and we all heal in different ways. And I allowed the way that I heal to kind of overtake me, and I flat admit in something I said that day I was wrong in retrospect, but it was something that was said in the heat of the moment and out of passion and everything else. I was at that time vehemently against anything from a sports standpoint being canceled that week, whether it was baseball games or whether it was football games that weekend. Because for me, that was the way that I healed. And I'll be very honest with you. we did a high school football broadcast on Friday night. It was at Wren High School. Can't remember who they played, but it was at Wren High School. Don Munson and I did that broadcast on Friday night. And for me personally, and I can only speak personally, therapeutically, that was the best thing that could have happened to me. And again, you have to remember, I was not a Christian at the time. I did not have a relationship with God. So therapeutically, that was the best thing for me, was to kind of get back on the horse and get back doing what you're doing. And if I'm being honest with myself, finding a way for a short period of time to put it out of my mind. So I was very, very adamant that, nothing should be canceled. The college games should be played. The NFL games should be played. Major League Baseball should get back to it as quickly as possible. And obviously I was wrong, especially in the areas that were immediately affected by the terrorist activity, primarily, obviously, speaking of New York City. What we saw afterwards, of course, was that everything from that standpoint was handled about as well as it could possibly be handled. And one of the indelible images that I have, and again, this just popped into my head. I've got a couple of things that you're going to see and hear later. I wish that I had found this and pulled it out as well. But one of the indelible images that I have is President George W. Bush, or it's actually two of them involving him, standing on a pile of rubble at the Trade Center as the rescue workers were digging out and still trying to find if there were any survivors, as well as pulling what bodies they could out of there and getting all of that mess cleaned up, which, as we know, would take months and months. But standing there with that megaphone, encouraging the people who were doing the work and saying something to the effect that, he heard them, and pretty soon the rest of the world would hear them too. It was a striking moment for me, and people criticize George W. Bush for a lot of reasons. But in the midst of everything that was going on, I just remember admiring a man who stood in defiance of what had just happened and the people who had perpetrated it. Not only then, but then later when he would throw out the first pitch at Yankee Stadium when the World Series got underway. And was wearing the Yankees jacket. We know he had a bulletproof vest on underneath. But it was one of the most emotional, spine-tingling moments that I have ever witnessed at a sporting event. Watching him stride out to the mound, again with the look of defiance. Even his stride seemed to say defiance to Osama bin Laden and everyone else, and throw out the first pitch as New York and Arizona got ready to play that 2001 World Series, and just encapsulating to a certain degree everything that America stands for, and mostly sending the message that we were going to get back to our way of life. And what the terrorists tried to do and tear us apart actually had the reverse effect, and it brought us together. But on that next day, that Wednesday, I was all about, hey, let's play the games and let's keep going. We can't let them think they've won. The country did need to step back and take a break, and it was the next week that things resumed. But I just remember that day listening to those people who called into the radio station and just noticing the change and the difference in them from perhaps previous calls when they had been calling and complaining about something that Clemson may have done or something that South Carolina may have done or Georgia may have done. And just noticing that, for this moment in time, and unfortunately it wouldn't last, but for this moment in time, people really honestly seemed to get what mattered the most. And the radio station, for the rest of that week, became, in effect, a news talk station. I think it was the following Monday that we got back to our regular sports talk programming. But it was I guess, another form of therapy for the people in our area to have that outlet. And we went with it as a station, and I credit our station management for doing that. And at those days, there at times were not a whole lot of things to credit the management at CCP for. But in that particular instance, I give them a lot of credit because, they recognized what was going on and decided to go with it. And for the rest of the week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, those 3 days, we put sports aside and just let people have a platform. And I think in some small way, being able to call and vent and have that platform, people said stupid things, people said silly things, but they were things that were coming from raw emotion. And some people said very thoughtful things. I think in looking back on it 17 years later, that it performed some kind of therapeutic service for the people who listened to the radio station at that time. And I can honestly say now that I was very happy to be a part of it. If for nothing else, just to be able to hit the button and say, you're on the air. Go. What's on your mind? What's on your heart? What are you feeling right now? And just letting them riff, just letting them take off. So that's my remembrance of that day and the immediate aftermath. And like I said, we actually did a high school football game on the air that Friday night. And for me personally, it was very therapeutic to get back behind the microphone and do what I love doing. And if I recall, there was a pretty decent crowd there, and there was obviously a moment of silence and a remembrance, and I may be mistaken on this, but I believe that was one of the first places that I recall that resurrected Lee Greenwood's God Bless the USA, which would gain a second life. Remember, it was most popular back in 1990 and 91 during the Gulf War. It gained a second life that really has never gone away, if you think about it. Beginning with 2001, September 11th, 2001. So we did that and got things kind of back to normal from our standpoint, and watched as the country would try and come together, try and set aside political differences and religious differences. And I think one of the other indelible images that I can recall from that day is seeing the entire Congress, Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals, standing on the steps of the Capitol, and if I'm not mistaken, singing Amazing Grace. It was a moment that, again, rocked everything that we stand for in this country to our very core. And for a short time anyway, it took all of those people and all those different walks of life and political beliefs and religious beliefs and everything, and brought us together for a common good, for a common purpose. And of course, it wouldn't last, unfortunately. But for a short period of time, there was a unity in this country. And it's a shame, really, that it takes that kind of instance, that kind of circumstance, that kind of attack on our freedoms to bring that kind of unity. But it did, and for a short period of time, we kind of marched together as one, moving forward with a singular purpose that, you know, we're going to get these guys, and it took years and years, as we know. But more than that, our way of life is not going to be taken away from us by somebody. And then as things went on, and you know, more stories came out, and you know, we could have done this years ago, and we could have done that years ago, and you know, I don't want to get into political theories and some of the outlandish and you know, wacky theories about what actually happened on 9/11 and who was responsible for it inside the borders of our own country. It's laughable, quite honestly. It really is. It's sad that there are those people in the midst of what was going on would and still to this day, by the way, would have those kind of theories and not take at face value the challenge to our way of life here in America for what it was. But I guess in every generation, you're going to have that sort of thing happen. I think the most important thing to remember 17 years later is that for one brief period of time, most of us, if not all of us, were on the same page. Most of us, if not all of us, realized what was actually important. And in just a few moments after the break, you're going to hear and see the message that 82-year-old Billy Graham delivered on the steps of the National Cathedral just days after 9/11 happened. If it happened on Tuesday, I think he may have delivered the speech on Friday. And when he gives it, I want you to listen to not only what was applicable 17 years ago, but what's applicable today as well. I don't know. I did not plan, as you can see, because there are some things that I'm remembering that I wish that I had pre-planned and been able to bring in to be part of this, or to research and look up to be part of this. I hadn't planned to do this today. Yeah, I was going to do a short video remembrance at the end of the show, and the more I sat here in the hour plus leading up to the show getting underway, the more it just struck me that for some reason I needed to do this. And I know some of you are probably saying, well, this is nice, but could we talk some football? We will tomorrow. Above and beyond everything else, when you listen to the Billy Graham message that'll be coming up in just a moment, it's about 12 minutes long. I want you to listen to his answer to why God allows things like this to happen to us personally, to our country, whether it's a terrorist attack or whether it's a personal tragedy that we may be going through or have gone through in the past. The message that he delivered, and again, he was 82 years old at the time, was short, succinct, and powerful. all at the same time. So I'm going to let you listen to that and watch that, and then we're going to come back with something special at the end of that. Our sponsors will forgive us today if we do this show commercial free. I promise you that I'll make it up to you as the week goes on. But I want you to watch this. This is from just days after the attack in 2011. And this is Billy Graham from the steps of the cathedral, the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., delivering the message that was requested by President George W. Bush. Watch this.
President and Mrs. Bush, I want to say a personal word on behalf of many people. Thank you, Mr. President, for calling this day of prayer and remembrance. We needed it at this time. We come together today to reaffirm our conviction that God cares for us. Whatever our ethnic, religious, or political background may be, the Bible says that He's the God of all comfort, who comforts us in our troubles. No matter how hard we try, words simply cannot express the horror, the shock, and the revulsion we all feel over what took place in this nation on Tuesday morning. September 11 will go down in our history as a day to remember. Today we say to those who masterminded this cruel plot and to those who carried it out that the spirit of this nation will not be defeated by their twisted and diabolical schemes. Someday, those responsible will be brought to justice, as President Bush and our Congress have so forcefully stated. But today, we especially come together in this service to confess our need of God. We've always needed God from the very beginning of this nation. But today we need Him especially. We're facing a new kind of enemy. We're involved in a new kind of warfare, and we need the help of the Spirit of God. The Bible words are our hope. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. But how do we understand something like this? Why does God allow evil like this to take place? Perhaps that is what you are asking now. You may even be angry at God. I want to assure you that God understands these feelings that you may have. We've seen so much on our television, heard on our radio, stories that bring tears to our eyes and make us all feel a sense of anger. But God can be trusted, even when life seems at its darkest. But what are some of the lessons we can learn? First, we're reminded of the mystery and reality of evil. I've been asked hundreds of times in my life why God allows tragedy and suffering. I have to confess that I really do not know the answer, totally, even to my own satisfaction. I have to accept by faith that God is sovereign, and He's a God of love and mercy and compassion in the midst of suffering. The Bible says that God is not the author of evil. It speaks of evil as a mystery. In 1 Thessalonians 2:7, it talks about the mystery of iniquity. The Old Testament prophet Jeremiah said, "The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it?" He asked that question, who can understand it? And that's one reason we each need God in our lives. The lesson of this event is not only about the mystery of iniquity and evil, but secondly, it's a lesson about our need for each other. What an example New York and Washington have been to the world these past few days. None of us will ever forget the pictures of our courageous firefighters and police, many of whom have lost friends and colleagues, or the hundreds of people attending or standing patiently in line to donate blood. A tragedy like this could have torn our country apart, but instead it has united us and we've become a family. So those perpetrators who took this on to tear us apart, it has worked the other way. It's backlash. It's backfired. We are more united than ever before. I think this was exemplified in a very moving way when the members of our Congress stood shoulder to shoulder the other day and sang, "God Bless America." Finally, difficult as it may be for us to see right now, this event can give a message of hope. Hope for the present and hope for the future. Yes, there is hope. There's hope for the present because I believe the stage has already been set for a new spirit in our nation. One of the things we desperately need is a spiritual renewal in this country. We need a spiritual revival in America. And God has told us in His Word time after time that we're to repent of our sins and we're turned to Him and He will bless us in a new way. But there's also hope for the future because of God's promises. As a Christian, I have hope not just for this life, but for heaven and the life to come. And many of those people who died this past week are in heaven right now, and they wouldn't want to come back. It's so glorious and so wonderful, and that's the hope for all of us who put our faith in God. I pray that you will have this hope in your heart. This event reminds us of the brevity and the uncertainty of life. We never know when we too will be called into eternity. I doubt if even one of those people who got on those planes or walked into the World Trade Center or the Pentagon last Tuesday morning thought it would be the last day of their lives. It didn't occur to them. And that's why each of us needs to face our own spiritual need and commit ourselves to God and His will now. Here in this majestic National Cathedral, we see all around us symbols of the cross. For the Christian, I'm speaking for the Christian now, the cross tells us that God understands our sin and our suffering. For He took upon Himself, in the person of Jesus Christ, our sins and our suffering. And from the cross, God declares, "I love you. I know the heartaches and the sorrows and the pains that you feel, but I love you." The story does not end with the cross. For Easter points us beyond the tragedy of the cross to the empty tomb. It tells us that there is hope for eternal life, for Christ has conquered evil and death and hell. Yes, there's hope. I've become an old man now, and I've preached all over the world. And the older I get, the more I cling to that hope that I started with many years ago and began and proclaimed it in many languages to many parts of the world. Several years ago, at the National Prayer Breakfast here in Washington, Ambassador Andrew Young, who had just gone through the tragic death of his wife, closed his talk with a quote from the old hymn, "How Firm a Foundation." We all watched in horror as planes crashed into the steel and glass of the World Trade Center. Those majestic towers built on solid foundations were examples of the prosperity and creativity of America. When damaged, those buildings eventually plummeted to the ground, imploding it upon themselves. Yet underneath the debris is a foundation that was not destroyed. Therein lies the truth of that old hymn that Andrew Young quoted. How firm a foundation. Yes, our nation has been attacked, buildings destroyed, lives lost. But now we have a choice, whether to implode and disintegrate emotionally and spiritually as a people and a nation, or whether we choose to become stronger through all of this struggle to rebuild on a solid foundation. And I believe that we're in the process of starting to rebuild on that foundation. That foundation is our trust in God. That's what this service is all about. And in that faith, we have the strength to endure something as difficult and horrendous as what we've experienced this week. This has been a terrible week with many tears, but also it's been a week of great faith. Churches all across the country have called prayer meetings, and today is a day that they're celebrating not only in this country, but in many parts of the world. And in the words of that familiar hymn that Andrew Young quoted, it says, "Fear not, I'm with thee. Oh, be not dismayed, for I'm thy God, and will give thee aid. I'll strengthen thee, help thee, and cause thee to stand upon thy righteous omnipotent hand." My prayer today is that we will feel the loving arms of God wrapped around us, and will know in our hearts that he will never forsake us as we trust in him. We also know that God is going to give wisdom and courage and strength to the president and those around him. And this is going to be a day that we will remember as a day of victory. May God bless you all.
That was Billy Graham from just days after the attacks on September the 11th, 2001. And I think a question that he asked then is very appropriate 17 years later in the political atmosphere that we live in this country now, and the divide in this country. Are we going to build on a solid foundation, or are we going to implode? It's something to think about some 17 years later after 9/11. We're going to close the show today in really an astonishing way if you think about it. On screen, you're going to see scrolling the names of every person who was killed in the September 11th, 2001 attacks, either on a plane in the World Trade Center, EMS, fire, police, anyone who lost their lives as a direct result of that attack, you're going to see on the screen. The astonishing thing about it is that it takes 10 minutes for all of the names to scroll. And I want you to think about that as you watch, that one attack claimed the lives of each and every name that you're going to see, and how long it takes for those names to scroll up the screen. Names that most of us have never heard, have never even seen, and maybe after today, if you watch it all the way through, you may never see again. But for this moment, try to comprehend exactly how devastating this attack was, that it takes 10 minutes for these names to scroll. And as you're watching individually and collectively, ask yourself the question, are we going to build on a solid foundation, or are we going to implode? I know what my answer is. 6 years ago, thank God, I set my house on that solid foundation. And I can only pray that each and every one of you, if you have not done so, would ultimately do the same. There are no easy answers for what happened then. There are no easy answers for tragedies in your life now. But there is a comforter. And I thank God that I found Jesus Christ when I did 6 years ago. Here are the names. That will be the end of the program once this is done. God bless you. And as Billy Graham reminded us, I got the song wrong. They did not sing Amazing Grace on the Capitol steps in 2011. They sang God Bless America. And I'll say that as we head out. God bless America. We'll be back with you tomorrow and get back to our normal way of life yet again. Until then, as the names begin to scroll, I'm Dan Scott saying God bless you. And so long, everybody.